Welcome everyone to the CS STEM student talk of the sixth Polygent Symposium of Rising Scholars. My name is Julia Reardon and I'm a master's student at Duke University and I will be moderating today's talk. The goal of the symposium is to celebrate and showcase the hard work of our Polygent scholars, all of whom have tirelessly worked on their projects over the past couple of months. We have 3 students presenting today on a variety of topics. A fellow Polygent's mentor will be scoring each student's presentation, which will help us determine prize winners after the event. Please type your questions in the chat if you have any for each speaker. We will allow 2 minutes for questions after each presentation. Today's speakers are Rohan Gupta, Jonas Ramsey, and Suraga Nallan. And first up, so we have Rohan, and once I get your presentation pulled up, you can start.
Okay, my computer's crashed, sorry about that. Okay, should I go?
Yes.
Okay, so my project was on detecting emotions in audio data of patients with post-traumatic stress disorder using convolutional neural networks. Next slide, please. So when I was going over my project with my mentor, I wanted to help benefit a large group of people. So in particular, I chose people with PTSD, and I found that the first documented case of PTSD was over 3,000 years ago from Mesopotamian soldiers. I also found out that around 8% of the US population, or approximately 24.4 million people, experience PTSD at any given time. So I wanted to help people with PTSD by using artificial intelligence. And one way I found out that I was able to do this was by using AI to accurately derive human emotions. This will help people with PTSD, as it will give medical professionals more correct diagnostic data to help correctly diagnose the people with PTSD, saving them both money and lives. Next slide, please. So when I was researching initially with my mentor, we found out 2 ways to get emotion from speech. We found that you could either use a sentimental analysis algorithm, or, which there's 2 major drawbacks to that, I guess. First, you have to map all the words to different types of emotions, and that takes a lot of effort and work. And then the second issue with that is that it omits speech, subtleties in speech, like my inflections of the voice or the pitch, which will make the accuracy worse when compared to an algorithm that trains natively on the audio data. So instead, I used a CNN model called ResNet to train on my audio data. Next slide. So for the data, I used a model called, a data set called RapDes, which I found to have the largest range of emotions. For pre-processing, I used MEL spectrograms, which I found worked the best on convolutional neural networks. And for image detection, like I said, I used ResNet, which is a CNN. Next slide, please. Now let's talk more in depth about the dataset I used. So as I said before, I used RapTest, and when compared to other datasets like TESS, it had a 15 to 33% increase in the range of emotions. In the dataset, there are 3 different types of data: audio only, and video and audio. However, I just used the audio only data as my project was focusing on emotions in audio data. When I configured the dataset, the audio files were 16-bit 48 kilohertz .wav files, and there were approximately 144 audio files. Next slide, please. Now for the pre-processing. Like I said before, MEL spectrograms work better with CNNs when compared to another type of pre-processing called MFCCs. The main difference between them is that MFCCs is a more pre-processed version of MEL spectrograms. When I created my MEL spectrograms, the browser function that I was using did not create the images of the same exact size. So when I went to go train the images on the model, my model kept returning lots of errors. So I had to pad them all to a specific size of 256 by 256. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about the model. The model I used was a pre-built model called Resonate 18, where it has 18 layers, as said in the title of the model, I guess. The benefits are for Resonate is that there is no loss of accuracy between the layers, so that allowed for lots of layers. Like the more complex Resonate models that can't train my computer, like 152, 64, and so on. Also, the shortcut connections that there allow previous layers. So what I mean by that is that the accuracy and the parameters from the previous layers are able to stick with future layers, which, as I said, allows for less a loss of accuracy. Next slide, please. And overall, when I trained my algorithm, it got 100% accuracy, and when I did my validation data set, it got 82% accuracy. And then for the hyperparameters, the learning rate was set to 0.03 and the momentum was set to 0.81. Next slide, please. And now, when I tried to break down my accuracy even further, I found that for the no stress group, which include just happiness, it got 100%. For the neutral stress group, it had an accuracy of 90%, which included neutral, calm, disgust, and surprised. And for the stress group, which included sad, angry, and fearful, it got an accuracy of 85%. To break down what my stress group did the worst, I created a confusion matrix and I found that the sad group, the sad emotion, did the worst out of all the emotions. Next slide, please. And for future work, I'd like to try to pad my images differently because I think that's where I lost the most accuracy from, because my padding wasn't uniform between all the images. I would also want to implement more data sets so I can get more data and add some real data from the real world, as this is only training from models, I guess. Next slide. So in conclusion, I used image-based model Resonate 18, and I got an accuracy of 82%, which is 4% better than the average published research in the ML space, I guess. It is also approximately 25% better than human detection. And I think that with more training, more data, and a better pre-processing, an accuracy above 90% is definitely achievable. So thank you. Any questions, I guess?
Yes, there's a question in the chat. You can either read it or I can read it.
How did you make sure there is no overfitting for your model? My model is overfitting, I think, in the training data, but like, I guess just adding more data, because I don't think 144 files were enough for my model to consume. I think just adding more data and having better hyperparameters would have caused no overfitting for my model, I guess. Yeah. Are there any more questions? Thanks. Yeah, the person just said awesome, great work. Thank you.
Well, if there are no more questions, we can move on to the next one. Good job, Rohan. So next is...
It's me.
Are you going to share your slides, or do you need me to do that for you?
I believe I can
Cool.
share mine perfectly fine. If you can see it.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, good.
Start whenever you're ready.
All right. So my name is Jonas Ramsey, and I decided to do a review paper about if it's possible for zombies to be created naturally. So for this review paper, I need to really explain what a zombie is. So for what I'm basing my criteria of zombies is based on the infected. One of my favorite movies was 28 Days Later. And for those, they're like, as opposed to undead, they're infected with a variation of rabies and Ebola. So I decided to use it because it's more realistic. Because even though zombies are very like fictional kind of creature, there's still like ways we can kind of get as close to it as possible with biology. So I want to kind of see for sci-fi, where does the science end and the fiction begin? I want to explore that line. So our criteria, or at least my criteria that me and my mentor did, was how can it infect through blood or saliva? Can it affect someone's behavior in a way where they would attack people randomly? And I also did, because we all know zombies, in every zombie movie have eaten people. So I did, can it alter someone in a way to commit cannibalism? So my first pathogen was Cordyceps unilaterus. And what Cordyceps is, it's a parasitic fungi that affects specifically ants. So what it does is when worker ants are foraging in the forest, spores attach to the cuticle, which is the exoskeleton of the ant, and it starts to spread more and more, and it's able to change the ant's behavior in a way and compel it to leave the nest towards a more favorable position for the fungus's growth. Then it forces the ant to bite by kind of controlling its muscles through bioactive chemicals that interfere with the ant's nervous system, because the ant is still aware of what's going on. It's just being overpowered. And once it bites into leaves, it's essentially left there for death. And then the fungus will use its dead body to as like a launch pad for spores, so the fungus is use ants to spread more. However, even though it affects ants in such a way, it has actually no effect on humans at all. It's because this parasite has evolved so specifically that it actually doesn't affect us at all. We can sometimes use it for medicine, which means it cannot create a zombie naturally, because it doesn't even affect humans at all. Next one is prions. Prion disease. So prions are very untalked about kind of pathogen. They're basically misfolded proteins that are capable of misfolding other cellular proteins. Prions are very deadly, however. They're very rare. It's very hard to get prion disease. We're specifically looking at BGCD, which is mad cow disease, and also Peru. Mad cow disease is, you might have heard of it before. It was big a couple of years ago. It was transmitted by when humans were to eat infected flesh of cows. And what it did was it would cause the brain to be damaged over time, because the prions would infect other proteins in your brain, and it would essentially cause lots of neurological degradation, and it would slowly kill off the person. It did cause dementia, psychotic behavior, which was one of our hallmarks of the zombie transformation, but it cannot make someone aggressive. It just makes someone altered in a way. And Kuru is a bit more interesting because it's specifically just for humans. Only humans get it, and it's caused from when humans were to eat. So this specifically happens in South America, where tribes were to eat through ritualistic things. They were to consume other people's flesh, and this flesh, which was affected with these prions, it would just be transmitted throughout this population. Peru is characterized by progressive cellular ataxia, like random outbursts of laughter, which is one of the names of Peru is actually the laughing disease because people would just sporadically laugh for no reason, and also emotional instability. While Peru has rare cases of causing borderline personality disorder, which can lead to someone being aggressive, it cannot make someone that aggressive to attack someone because it's more likely to make a person more inactive and unconcerned. They're very just in a vegetative state. So in the end, prions cannot create a zombie naturally because they cannot be transmitted easily. They can only be transmitted through ingestion of prion enriched flesh. It just cannot make someone aggressive enough to attack people for no reason, and it cannot cause cannibalistic behaviors. Rabies is probably the most well-known pathogens of all of them. It's transmitted through saliva, through both animals and humans. So that's one above the rest so far. So for animals, we all know that it's well known for making animals aggressive, and it also can cause hydrophobia and aerophobia. Hydrophobia is it causes animals to have difficulty drinking water, and aerophobia is they're afraid, not exactly afraid, but it's difficulty with breathing air. But it's characterized as a phobia because of spasms they have. Seems like they're afraid of such things. For the aggression is caused, so when in animals, rabies glycoproteins inhibit the receptors in the brain, which usually we've considered it just to affect the muscles, but by binding to neuroreceptors, the virus changes communication within the brain, which thus affects animal behavior and then causes animals to be very aggressive. But for humans, it actually does not make anyone aggressive. While we do exhibit hydrophobia and aerophobia, we do not become as aggressive. There's actually 3 different ways rabies can affect a human. There's a furious, a paralytic, and a rare non-classic form. Furious rabies is characterized by hyperactivity, excitable behavior, hydrophobia and aerophobia, like I said earlier, but death usually occurs a few days after cardiorespiratory arrest. And paralytic rabies is characterized by muscles slowly becoming paralyzed, starting at the bite site, and it's soon a coma, and death soon follows. And a rare form, since it's very rare, there's not much research about it, but from what we know, it's generally associated with seizures and more profound sensory and motor symptoms. And while there is a vaccine for rabies, I'm sure that all of us have gotten it. Disease is fatal after the symptoms onset, and rabies can take a very long time to show the symptoms, from 10 days to 2 years. But once the symptoms actually show, there is no treatment to help with that. But however, even though that rabies can infect through saliva, it cannot actually make anyone aggressive. There is medical footage of people with rabies. They're actually very mentally sound. They're able to talk, they're able to do everything perfectly fine. It's just that physically they're deteriorating, and obviously, since it doesn't affect behavior, it can't make someone eat another human being, so it cannot create a zombie naturally. Toxoplasmosis is probably the most rare out of them. Toxoplasmosis gondii is the parasite that causes toxoplasmosis. It's an infection. Toxoplasmosis gondii is a parasite that mice have. It's this parasite is usually found in cat feces. And what it does, it makes mice more less fearful of cats, which increases their likelihood of being eaten. This is because the parasite creates cysts in the mice brain, which basically causes inflammation, which causes behavioral changes in the mice's brain, which dampens that fear response, and it makes them more likely to go towards cats and get eaten. And this is important for the parasites because the parasites have evolved to reproduce in the cat, specifically its liver. And then from there, it's able to just, it doesn't affect the cat in any way, it just uses it to reproduce. Now, toxoplasmosis can affect human beings, not in the same way of mice, obviously, but it can create cysts in our brain as well, which can cause neuroinflammation, which can lead to many mental illnesses. There is examples of schizophrenia being caused, and specifically paranoid schizophrenia, which in some very rare cases has been linked to Wendigo psychosis, which is basically cannibalism. And it's usually transmitted through food. However, it can be transmitted through mother to child. So if your mother were to be infected with this infection, it is possible for the child to get it too, but there is some cases of blood transfusions carrying that as well. And obviously schizophrenia is linked with aggression. So this very rare or very untalked about pathogen actually ticks all the marks for being able to create a zombie. And I want to talk about why I'm like an infected person as opposed to like a reanimation, because reanimation, at least through pathogens, is essentially impossible. This is because when a person's heart stops beating, the person immediately enters the comatose state. It's because the brain is essentially pumping the whole body full of neurochemicals like dopamine and norepinephrine to try to keep the body alive as much as possible. But obviously, the body can only last so long without oxygenated blood, and soon the tissues, the organs start to deteriorate and die, and there is no pathogen that can kind of restart the brain or the heart and kind of repair this kind of tissue damage. So thus, there is no way that reanimation is possible. So in concluding remarks, so can a zombie virus happen naturally? Theoretically, yes. But as I stated earlier, this is a bunch of rare possibilities. It's just statistically improbable. It's not going to happen, and especially not a zombie apocalypse, so no need to worry about that. But I also want to talk about why natural as opposed to man-made. This is because naturally it's easier to kind of guess what is in nature than opposed to man-made, because biological engineering is we don't know what is possible in the future for that, because obviously it's constantly evolving. I cannot predict what we'll be able to do 10 years in the future, but I can guess based on what's natural, how these pathogens are in nature, if they're able to evolve or if they're able to do something already. But I hope that this presentation kind of inspires people to this, even if it's a dumb question, to kind of try to figure out how much of it is possible. Because obviously zombies are a very fictional topic, but I obviously got this far.
Cool. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for him?
What the most surprising I discovered was the Wendigo psychosis. Wendigos are a very famous Native American story about natives consuming the flesh of other natives and becoming basically supernatural kind of monsters. But there's actually a disorder called Wendigo psychosis that can cause people for cannibalism. Paranoid schizophrenia is linked to that. So I found it very interesting that something that for toxoplasmosis affects a lot of people is very unspoken about pathogen. And I found it very interesting that even though it's barely happened, that it can cause cannibalism, which is just something I found so surprising. Any other questions?
Well, if there's no more questions, thank you, and we'll move on to the next person.
Thank you. In my references.
You're muted.
Next is Suraga, who will be presenting.
Okay, so my polygens project is measuring the efficiency of greenhouse gases to absorb heat. Since the dawn of the planet, life has depended on the temperature of the Earth being warm enough to survive. There's one thing in our atmosphere that makes the temperature warm enough, and that is greenhouse gases. There are 4 main greenhouse gases: water vapor, nitrous oxide, carbon dioxide, and methane. Greenhouse gases absorb heat from the sun, trap some of it, and reflect the rest back into space, which is known as the greenhouse effect. This trapping of the heat is what enables the Earth to be warm enough to support life. But how does the greenhouse effect work? Let's say that there is a molecule of carbon dioxide. A particle of light, aka a photon, will hit the carbon dioxide molecule. The carbon dioxide will absorb the photon, and the photon will make the molecule vibrate. Then the bonds between the carbon and the oxygen atoms in the molecule will bend and stretch to absorb the photons. This is what traps the heat. In time, the molecule will release some of the photons back into space. Okay, so this does sound great, but too much greenhouse gases is a bad thing. Since the Industrial Revolution, there has been an increase in greenhouse gases, so too much heat is being trapped. This is what's causing global warming. One of the greenhouse gases is water vapor. It is the most abundant greenhouse gas in the atmosphere and the gaseous state of water. Unlike the other greenhouse gases, water vapor is not considered dangerous and has not increased due to human activities. Another greenhouse gas is carbon dioxide, which is an acidic, colorless gas with a density about 53% higher than that of dry air. Its solid form is called dry ice. Increases in atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide have strengthened its absorption and emission of infrared radiation, causing the rise in average global temperatures since the mid-20th century. Another greenhouse gas is nitrous oxide, which is a colorless gas with a slight metallic smell. Emissions have gone up by 30% over the past 40 years, mostly coming from food production and fertilizer. So these greenhouse gases are quite dangerous, but how do we know which one we need to be most careful of? So we need to be the most careful of the most powerful greenhouse gas, and that is the one that absorbs the most heat over a period of time. To find out which greenhouse gas absorbs the most heat over a period of time, I conducted an experiment where I filled 4 bottles with greenhouse gases and measured the change in temperature over a period of time. So the temperature change of gases in plastic bottles was measured. What? To do this, I filled 4 bottles with either water vapor, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, or air, which was the control group. The temperature of the gases were recorded over the course of 2 hours and 40 minutes. The temperature was measured at 0 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and then every 20 minutes. The experiment was conducted 4 times in the month of August between 12 to 4 p.m. when there was the most heat. The water vapor was made by boiling by boiling water in a pot with a hole in the lid. The water vapor was then transferred to the bottle by straw. One end was placed directly on top of the pot lid and the other was placed inside of the bottle. Once the water vapor was in the bottle, the cap was closed tightly. The carbon dioxide was made by waiting for dry ice to sublimate. A small amount of dry ice was placed inside the bottle. Once the dry ice was in the bottle, the cap was closed tightly. Nitrous oxide was produced by whipped cream chargers in a canister that sprays it. The charger was secured on the canister, and the canister was put upside down, and the nitrous oxide was pumped into the bottle. The control group was air, so nothing was put in that one's bottle. The caps of the 4 bottles had holes in them so that the thermometers could go through. When all 4 bottles were fitted with their gases and thermometers, they were put in a lidless plastic see-through box to ensure that they didn't fall over. The box was placed in direct sunlight, as can be seen in the picture, and a formula was used to determine the percentage of temperature change. Okay, my slides are not working. Okay. In my experiment, I found that carbon dioxide had the highest percent temperature change throughout the experiment. In 3 out of 4 trials, carbon dioxide went up by the highest percentage. In trial 3, water vapor went up by the highest percentage, but in all the other trials, carbon dioxide temperature went up by the highest percentage. Nitrous oxide went up by the lowest percentage. Its average percentage of change was 2% lower than the average of water vapor and 9% lower than the average of carbon dioxide. This suggests that carbon dioxide is the most powerful greenhouse gas and nitrous oxide is the least powerful greenhouse gas. These are my charts in my experiment. The first 4 are the percentage change in temperature in each trial, so trial 1, trial 2, trial 3, and trial 4. The 5th graph is the overall percentage temperature change in each of the gases. It can be seen that carbon dioxide had higher percentage changes in all 4 trials. The last chart shows the average overall percentage temperature change throughout all 4 trials. In this graph, it can clearly be seen that carbon dioxide went up by the highest percentage. This is not the right slide. Okay, the results of this experiment suggest that carbon dioxide is the most powerful greenhouse gas, which could have many ramifications. Given that there is a lot of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and that carbon dioxide emissions are increasing, this could lead to warmer temperatures. This will result in harm to the environment and harm to all life on Earth. Nitrous oxide emissions are minimal, mostly coming from fertilizer in certain factories. It was also found that nitrous oxide had the least percentage change. Given these 2 things, nitrous oxide will not be much of a problem. However, it's still a greenhouse gas and should not be completely overlooked. There were a few limitations in the experiment. It would have been more accurate if things such as more accurate thermometers, artificial sunlight, and 100% leak-proof bottles were used. Why is my experiment important? We know that global warming is a big problem. In my experiment, I found that carbon dioxide is the most powerful greenhouse gas. This means that it is the biggest contributor to global warming. Now that we know this, we must focus on finding ways to stop carbon dioxide emissions and take it out of the atmosphere. Okay. Any questions?
Do you see the question in the chat?
I don't see any question.
Okay. Alex Armstrong asked, where do you go from here? What are your next steps?
My next steps would probably be doing the experiment a couple more times just to make sure that my original results were correct and that carbon dioxide is the most powerful greenhouse gas. But after that, I would definitely like to explore ways to reduce carbon dioxide emissions and ways to take it out of the atmosphere.
Well, if there are no more questions, then thank you, Suraga. Good job. And with the conclusion of that presentation, that concludes this session. Thank you, everyone, for coming.